This video is brought to you by SGS Engineering, makers of high quality garage equipment and tools for over 20 years. Welcome to FunRover TV. In this episode you'll learn how to replace the clutch on your Land Rover Defender. Now, one thing to bear in mind is we're using a 2.4 litre, the Duratorque Puma model engine. So if you've got one of those, if you've got the 2.2 Puma, this video you can follow it almost to the T. But if you have an older Defender, a V8, or one of the other diesel models, the principles and concepts that we're using are very similar, and you can kind of follow along with that. But you will need your owner's manual for the correct vehicle because parts have changed. The gearbox is totally different on this model, so bolts and things like that we're pointing out are going to be in a different place. The clutch on any vehicle is a consumable part. It will wear out, especially on Land Rovers. You'll find quite often they've done towing and things like that, but you should be able to get at least 100,000 miles out of a clutch generally. The problem you have, especially on Pumas, there's a bit of a fault with the design of the original clutch that came with the vehicle. So the part has actually been superseded 3 times. The latest one, you should be able to see it on the screen right now. That is the one that you want to buy. That's the correct, most up-to-date Puma clutch part number that you can get as of September 2014. So we'll be fitting that part. Here's how we plan to remove the gearbox. Using this technique you can swap your clutch at home, such as on your drive. We're using an engine hoist, and this will be crucial so that we can remove the front cab, interior trim and the floors to suspend the box from the crane. We'll then need to remove the ancillary parts such as the exhaust, chassis crossmember and prop shafts, and then we can shimmy the gearbox backwards and down, clearing space to work on the clutch plate. Some owners choose to follow a similar method, but only move the gearbox backwards several inches. This saves you a few hours on labour time, but the clearance that it gives is minimal and makes swapping the clutch release bearing incredibly difficult using this method. One thing that'll make this job a lot easier is having the correct manual for your vehicle. I've put it on an iPad because it's just a really easy thing to flick through. It's not going to get too damaged by oil and things like that. So make sure you have the manual. You can download them free. There's plenty on the internet available in PDF, or you can buy a printed copy from eBay or Amazon, wherever. So having the manual and following it is going to help us a great deal here. Here's a list of tools needed to complete the job. You'll need a socket set, 1/2 inch and 3/8 inch ideally, spanners in various metric sizes from 6mm upwards, and you'll need duplicates of most sizes. You'll also need at least one 9/16 AF combination spanner for the prop shafts. A prop shaft removal tool, such as this one, makes the job much easier. Various hammers, a torque wrench, breaker bars, trim pullers, screwdriver set, mole grips, pliers, a bottle or trolley jack, in fact you'll need several of those, engine hoist and crane. We're using the 2-ton professional folding engine hoist from SGS Engineering. It's a high quality UK made product with superior lifting power. It's much better than cranes of a higher price, and the SGS crane can also lift around 500mm higher than competitors' hoists. It comes with a 2-year warranty and is CE marked. It's perfect for Land Rover owners who carry out their own maintenance. You can check out our video review of this crane by clicking here. You'll also need lifting strops and straps or appropriate chains for holding the gearbox. You'll need a clutch alignment tool, rated shackles, a load leveler, blocks of timber, a socket extension bar. You'll also need a brake and clutch bleeder or a clear jar with a small length of clear tubing to fit over the clutch bleed nipple, clutch and brake cleaner, and finally penetrant spray. For a full list of tools that you'll need to complete this job, check out the post on funrover.com for this episode. Right, so step 1 is to remove the seats, and it's very easy to do. It's just 4 bolts per seat. Lift off your seat cushions, put them somewhere clean and dry, and then we'll undo the 4 bolts around the outer edge of the seats, and they'll be out in about 5 minutes. You should disconnect the battery at this point to prevent any electrical problems later on. Next, we're going to lift out the cubby box. Now we've undone it, so we can get to the centre floor console to remove that. Right, so we're going to tease the carpet off, and it's literally just fastened in underneath bits of trim, so carefully remove it. Place this to one side. The carpet backing can be easily damaged. So then you can remove the gator off of the transmission, off of the gearbox and the lower box lever. It's just another push fit. There we go. Now we need to release the knob. Apparently the manual says you can hit yourself in the face doing that, but it seemed fairly safe to me. So we've released the gear knob. Just got two little pins on either side that you can release. Then we will remove this foam insert. You can just gently take that out. Try not to damage it, because obviously it's a specialist item part. Also, remove this high-low selector housing cover tripod. We need to remove the screws from the center console panel. There are, I think there was 6 of those. So you need to take those out. And when I've taken them out, I'm going to put them into my special piece of cardboard along with the washers, so that I don't lose those. Here's a FunRover top tip. Get a piece of scrap cardboard, and then all of the screws and bolts you pull out, you just carefully push them through, like so, and then you can label them. So for example, these are the center console panel. There's about 5 or 6 of them, so I'll just draw a little box around, and there's no confusing them where the screws and bolts actually came from when you need to put them back in. Now we're going to remove the actual center console. I'm just using a breaker bar. Very gently, I don't want to scratch the paintwork. I'm going to prise that up. It's got an adhesive foam seal around the underneath. So we'll prise that up and then slide it off, and that reveals the gearbox to us. Make sure to disconnect the reversing lamp switch electrical connector. So we're removing the heat shield from the turbo now. We can lift that out then. Turbo shield removed. Then remove the 4 nuts that hold the cat downpipe in place. You can access the high-low selector rod ball joint from below. Push the button shown here to release. The ball cup connector will just pop off with a little bit of force applied. We can then remove the 4 high-low selector lever securing bolts. These are Torx head. Now you'll need to lift out the high-low selector lever. Make sure to remove the 4 gear selector housing securing bolts next. Now it's time to remove the chassis cross member. It has 8 bolts shown here. Once loosened, you can knock the cross member out. We're using a plank of wood here to stop it from hitting the floor and direct it away from us. Once removed, you can unbolt the front prop shaft and carefully support that so it doesn't fall onto you. This is where the prop shaft removal tool comes in handy, because it makes undoing these bolts much easier. You can see here we've made sure to mark the mating surfaces for alignment when it comes to refitting. The bolts on the exhaust will need to be undone next. These can be heavily corroded due to exposure to road salts, and as you can see here, ours have just completely sheared. We had to use Irwin bolt extractors here, which were the only way to feasibly undo the bolts. Remove the 2 catalytic converter mounting bracket securing bolts, and then the catalytic converter pipe. Now this can be a bit of a fiddle to remove. You may need to undo the catalytic converter shield whilst it's in place to be able to get this through the gap between the engine block, the bulkhead and the chassis. Next we need to remove the center silencer, so undo the bolts for that. And you can see we have to remove it from the rubber mounting, so that should drop out. It's fairly heavy, so be careful. And then you need to remove your rear prop shaft. Now you can support that using string or cable ties, so we can get access to the handbrake drum, which comes off with that screw. And then you can see the inner workings of the handbrake. Nothing too complicated there, but that needs to be undone, and again supported underneath the vehicle, just using a bit of rope. And there are additional bolts which you'll find wires and things connected to. So you should undo any electrical connection, this breather for the gearbox, and then we can start working on the seat box. So you can see here we've undone all visible bolts for the seat box, and including the seat belt bracket, and also all the bolts along the back of the seat box. Those need to be removed. We've removed the battery as well to make it a bit lighter when we do take this out. And as you can see here, we are undoing some brackets that you'll find underneath the seat box. Make sure to clamp up your clutch hose pipe, because that could bleed clutch fluid all over the floor, make a mess. Now here we have the SGS engineering crane. You can see our accompanying review for this crane. It's been an absolutely fantastic tool. This job would be impossible without it. So check out the review of that here. It's a great piece of kit, really good value, and dramatically outperforms cranes that are a lot more expensive than it. So definitely have a look at that if you want to make this job much easier. So you can see we've now supported the gearbox under the crane. We are undoing the gearbox mountings. Those can be quite stiff, so get your breaker bar out and undo those. We'll be using lifting straps there because they're a bit softer, they're not going to damage your gearbox casing. Now undo the bell housing bolts. There are 8 of those, and you can take the floors out again. These are quite often rusty, so just be aware of that. You need to unplug all the electrical loom, which is a bit of a fiddle, so take some pictures while you're doing that, and you can put it back together much easier later on. Those are those brackets we mentioned earlier on for the seat box, and we've lifted the seat box out now, so we've got full access to the gearbox. We can get our crane properly in, and we've got that securely suspended underneath. Now before you lower your gearbox, ensure that you remove the clutch pipe from the clutch bleed nipple on the Puma. It's in a very inaccessible place on the passenger side front left of the gearbox. So get your hand up there, and it disconnects using a rather fiddly pin system. So you can see we've cracked the seal between the bell housing and the engine. That was quite corroded and a bit stuck, so you might have to wiggle that about, smack it a little bit with a hammer carefully, and you can see we've freed it there. Now it's time to start to get the gearbox out, so never go underneath the gearbox. It might look like we are, but we're actually safely to the side of the gearbox there. And in order to free the gearbox from the flywheel, we're just using a bit of a jack just to wiggle it around, trying to break the seal so we can lower the gearbox out nice and safely. Everybody's clear of the gearbox, and we can lower it onto the legs of the engine crane. So we could actually remove that now from underneath the vehicle if we wanted to do so, get good access to the gearbox. Just making sure that all the wires and cables are well out of the way, so we're not going to trap them when we raise them up. And you can see the mole grips that we put on the clutch pipe just to the left there. So that's the clutch disc, and this is the old one we're removing. That's the input shaft from the gearbox, and the integrated clutch release bearing that they have now, that's also worn, so we're going to replace that. Just comes undone with 3 Torx bolts, you can see there. We're using an extension bar here, so we can start to undo the clutch cover. That just comes undone nice and easy. And this is the clutch alignment tool that we're using now. You put that through the clutch disc into the flywheel, as you can see here, and it aligns the clutch plate, the clutch cover, and the flywheel all together, so that when we put the gearbox back in, we can slip that in really easily. Now you can see the old one that we've removed is physically damaged. It's basically worn. The inner gear there, it's actually loose. That's because there's been no resin applied on that part number. The latest one, that's actually set in place with resin. The springs, they were very close to coming out, and if you can imagine if they came out in the gearbox or in the clutch mechanism, it would cause a heck of a lot of damage. So it was a good thing that we did replace it when we did, because it made quite a noise and it was likely to fail at some point. So it was well worth doing this job. It's not too difficult, just be methodical and follow your instruction manual. Putting it back together, it's basically just everything we've done in reverse. You can see there our new clutch release bearing and clutch slave cylinder. Nice shiny new one. And the new clutch disc, we've cleaned those off with some brake and clutch cleaning spray and bolted it back up, torqued it back up, and then you can basically just follow through everything you've done before in reverse to rebuild the vehicle. We hope you've enjoyed this video from FunRover TV. But in the meantime, check out FunRover.com, the Land Rover online blog and magazine. It's completely free, and there's so much content on there about Land Rovers, guides, tips, news, reviews of products. So check that out. And until next time, remember, where we're going, we don't need roads.